Hello, I'm back again, and it's Tuesday training. Today we're going to talk about, we've had a question, thank you very much Felicity, and she asked, do you think that some horses just don't learn or are unable to be trained with any long-term success? And I think we've all come across horses that we've sort of got a bit frustrated with and thought, oh my goodness, you know, you're stupid or you're untrainable or something like that. But we know that really they do learn. I don't think I've ever come across a horse that I would consider unable to be trained. I think there are other things that are coming into play, and we'll talk about those today. So I really can't think of one horse that I would say was untrainable. I can think of a few horses that I haven't enjoyed training, and I don't think have taken the training on very well. So perhaps that's what Felicity means about without any long-term success. And I think there might be a certain number of very small cases where that is possible, and we'll talk about those a bit later. Just to fill you in on a little bit about the training at 2, the live training at 2, I'm going to just stick to one question and answer that. And I'm going to be as brief as I can, because there's nothing worse than having to hunt through an hour of me sitting here live to try and find what it is you want an answer to. So the question will be posted up there, and you'll be able to read that if you think it's something you're interested in. I hope that the live session will only be 10 or 15 minutes, and you'll be able to find the answer to your question really easily. If you have a question, please leave it in the comments or PM me or email me, anything you like. I'd love to hear your questions, and I will definitely try and work your question into the training at 2. We have training at 2 every weekday at 2 o'clock Brisbane time, but it is recorded, so you can find it in the videos on the Can Do Equine site. So back to today's question. I recently did an experiment which we call the engagement zone, and we looked at how horses learn. So the experiment actually had 100 horses in it, and with those horses we taught them a lesson which was to back up off rein pressure, and it was off rein pressure from just one rein, which is quite an unusual thing to learn from the ground. Not many horses have learnt that, so we thought it was a good way of seeing how well they learnt the lesson. Give you a little bit of a rundown on how the experiment was taught. So the first thing that happened was the owners of these 100 horses were given a questionnaire to fill out, and that told us all about the horse's history, how it was trained, the behaviors it exhibited at the time, how often it was worked, how it was housed, all of those sorts of relevant questions, demographic and behavioral and training questions. We then, half of those horses were given a treatment, which was a give to the bit exercise. The other 50 were just left to stand for 10 minutes. The lesson itself consisted of 8 trials of backing through a 5-meter corridor. So we set up a corridor, and then the horse was asked to back up, first off the left rein, to walk backwards in the 5 meters, then they'd come around and they'd do the same thing off the right rein. So we went left, right, alternating for a total of 8, so 4 off each rein. We then looked at how quickly the horses completed the task. So that was just looking at the last 2 trials, so trials 7 and 8, 7 being the left rein, 8 being the right rein. And we compared horses' speeds, so how fast they completed the backup of 5 meters. We then looked at learning efficiency, and that was looking at the difference between how fast they completed the first trial, which was their test trial, which was their first time doing it, and how fast they completed the last trial. So that would be 1 and 7 for the left rein and 2 and 8 for the right rein. And we looked at that difference. So obviously the horses that are learning more efficiently are completing that faster. So they've got a bigger difference. So if they took, 20 seconds to complete it in trial 1, and they only took 5 seconds to complete in trial 7, then that's a really good difference for the left rein. If they took 20 seconds to complete in trial 1 and they took 19 seconds to complete in trial 7, then that's not so good. So that's what we looked at, those two factors. And we had some really interesting results. What we found was breed was a big factor. Now, we divided breed into thoroughbreds, because we had a lot of thoroughbreds in this 100 horses, and other breeds. And we found that thoroughbreds were slower at learning, so they didn't learn as well. And they were also slower at completing the task, so they actually backed up slower than the other breeds as well. Anxiety, so horses that exhibited anxiety or were reported to exhibit anxiety by their owners, things such as calling out when alone, pawing on the ground, things like that, that indicated that the horse was anxious in different situations, not in the training situation itself. Anxious horses tended to learn a little bit faster, and they tended to complete the task faster too, which was quite interesting. The sex of the horse was also a factor. The mares were faster than the geldings. We only had 3 stallions, so we took the stallions out of the study. It wasn't enough. But the mares completed faster than the geldings. And that was interesting because when you talk to people about mares, and I was doing another study at the same time, which actually, you know, people really preferred geldings over mares. And one of the reasons was because they're so trainable and easy, but the mares were a bit faster. The horses that exhibited conflict behaviors, so that included bucking and rearing and bolting and pinning your ears, swishing your tail and things like that, that the owners reported had those behaviors on a regular basis. Those horses were slower at completing the task and slower at learning. So that obviously has an effect. So horses that do exhibit conflict behaviors like that and swish their tails, pin their ears, and those sorts of things were slower at completing the task. Another thing which was really interesting was that we found that horses that were in work completed the task faster. So that's horses that were regularly ridden or worked on the ground or in the arena. They completed the task faster, but they didn't learn more efficiently. So that means the difference between the first and the last trials wasn't any bigger. And I thought that was really interesting because we do often think that if we work our horse every day, that it's going to learn much better. I mean, I would assume that before I did this study, I would assume that if I worked my horse every day, then he would start to learn more efficiently. And apparently that isn't the case, which I think is good news because we rarely get to work our horse every day. We rarely get to work our horse as often as we'd like to. And what this is telling us is that maybe it's not such a big problem. It might not complete the task as fast, it might not back up as fast, but it's learning just as efficiently as the other horses. So that was good news, I thought. The final thing, the biggest difference, was the left and right rein difference. All of the horses learnt more efficiently on the right, and they completed the task faster on the right as well. So isn't that interesting? Because we do so much on the left-hand side of the horse. So what I think probably happens is the horse gets desensitized to pressure on the left. With this experiment, I had the handler only using negative reinforcement. So I said to her, you can't praise the horse, you can't touch the horse, you can't do anything else. All you can do is apply rein tension, and you release it when the horse steps backwards. So it was complete negative reinforcement, and it is very hard to isolate negative reinforcement like that because it's really unnatural. If we're training a horse, we always use a combination of positive and negative reinforcement. The idea that you can only use one or the other is sort of crazy. And when people say to me, I only use positive reinforcement, and I say, okay, so you never put a head collar on the horse. You don't ride the horse. And, if you don't do those things, then perhaps you do only use positive reinforcement. Good on you. But it's not very usual that is actually the case. It's usually a combination of the two. As soon as you sit on the horse, you're using negative reinforcement. You can also use positive reinforcement. And it doesn't have to be in the form of food either. It can be praise, it can be a pat, it can be a kind word. So that was a really big difference to me, the left and right reins. So do our horses, because we spend so much time leading them on the left and getting on the left and all these cues on the left rein. Is the right side of the horse a much blanker canvas? And are they learning better over there because it is such a blank canvas? And I think that is probably the reason, I would say. And that leads me into the final point of, some horses are very difficult to train with any long-term success. And I think the reason, I think it's very few horses, and I would say it's less than 1 in 100 that I've come across. And I wonder, I have a theory that it might be some sort of equine post-traumatic stress disorder. The horses that I've come across that would fit into this category, maybe 1 in 300, something like that, are all horses that have had a very, very traumatic experience. And it might not seem traumatic to us, but it does to them. So one horse that I came across that I knew well had pulled back as a youngster. It had been tied too early and hadn't been taught to tie properly. It had pulled back and it had broken off a bit of the stable or whatever it was attached to. And it had then fled, and the thing had been chasing it with the lead rope, of course, because it was now tied to the piece of wood that chased it. And that horse, it was a very difficult thing for that horse to recover from. And I'm not sure that it ever was going to, really, because it would get to a place where it was okay, and then suddenly it wasn't okay at all. And the flight instinct would kick back in. The flight instinct is something that's very hard to extinguish. That once it's become a response, it is really very hard to get rid of. Another sort of common one, probably the most common one, is horses that have had very first poor saddling experiences. So they've been put in the round pen, perhaps, which is, certainly a rather popular thing to do. Pop the saddle on and then let it buck it out, as we say. And so the poor horse goes around bucking and quite often injures itself. And I've come across horses that have had pulled muscles down their back and then they're expected to be ridden. It can be an absolute disaster. But some horses really never recover from that experience. And it is very, very difficult. What I find about these horses that I do think might be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder is that they become a little bit unpredictable. And, we always say horses are unpredictable, but horses really shouldn't be unpredictable. And if they are, there's probably something wrong, or maybe we're just not reading them well enough to know what they should be doing next. But what I find with these particular horses, if you think they don't learn well, they don't retain information well, and if everything can be going fine and then suddenly it just happens like that and everything changes and the horse usually leaves, that's the most common response, then I think those horses are very difficult. I think it's very difficult to come back from that. And I haven't yet seen anybody be successful, but as I say, it's not something that you often see. And unfortunately, most of those horses end up with a rather sad prospects in the end. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Felicity. I think the 99.99% of horses are very trainable. I think it does depend a little bit on their history as to how trainable and how quickly they'll learn things. And as you pointed out, I think earlier in your question, they all learn differently. Sometimes we just need to explain things differently to the horse. But I do think there are a small percentage there that are very, very difficult and and I would question long-term success with such horses. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is hump day. So if you have a behavior question, leave it in the comments and I'll try and get to it tomorrow. Bye.